Welcome back to episode 10 of the Between the Lines podcast. We're back again with some NBA playoff talk. So, by the time this episode's out, the conference finals will be set and we'll make our predictions in this video. But before we get to that, we're going to actually start with a mini game here and we're going to be playing Guess the Player. So, pretty much, Jay and I have like a player in mind and we're taking turns one by one, like asking questions that can only be answered with a yes or no, one by one. And the goal is to guess the other person's player first and just a couple like requirements were we chose like only active players, then they have to be somewhat well known. So can't pick some like bum from like the 80s. We gotta know enough about them. And yeah, Jay, you wanna have the first question?
Sure. All right, I'm gonna go with let me get my conference now. So is your player in the Eastern Conference?
No, he's not.
No. Okay.
Okay. And then the other rule that I forgot to mention is like we can't like repeat each other's questions, but
Yeah.
that's like pretty standard.
Okay.
Um, I mean, I'm not technically repeating it. Is your player in the Western Conference?
No, my player is not in the Western Conference.
Okay.
It's a good way to circumvent the rules. Okay. Your player's in the Western Conference. Let's see. Did your player average 20 points per game this season, this regular season? Average at least 20 points per game.
No, he did not.
No. Okay. So,
Okay. Did your player is your player a starter, or were they a starter for the majority of this season?
let me make sure. Yeah, the majority of the season they were a starter. Yeah.
Okay. There's a little bit of hesitation, so I feel like it might be a guy who's like in and out of the lineup, but
Yeah,
maybe you're trying
maybe
to
on the border, but definitely passes the majority. Majority.
maybe you're just trying to throw me off with a hesitation, you know. Maybe it's a guy like Luca who played all the games. I don't know. All right, your turn.
Okay. Western Conference player. Is your player is your player a guard?
Um, my player is not a guard.
Not a guard. Okay, forward slash center.
And just for reference, we have the basketball reference page up for both of our guys just to confirm what's so we're going off of what's listed on there. Okay. Uh so he is a starter. Okay, this is a bit of a subjective one, but I'm just gonna trust you're gonna answer truthfully here.
Okay.
Would you say your player, like relative to their position group, so like relative to point guards if they're a point guard, are they known as like a big body? Are they like kind of swole for their position, like kind of strong, or no?
No, I wouldn't say they're considered strong.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay. Hmm. Western Conference forward or center that averaged less than was your player a s- was your player trying to see how to okay, well you asked the starter one. So was your player a bench player for the majority of the season?
Yes.
Yes, bench player. Okay. Bench player majority of the season. Okay.
Okay, so far we got your guys in the East. He's a starter, not necessarily like strong for his position. Okay, has your player been in the league for 4 or more years? So four plus including four.
Yep. Yes.
Okay, maybe a vet. Okay.
Okay. Mm. Has your player, the current team that he's on, has this been the team he's been on his entire career or no?
No,
No, okay.
good
Not
question. Okay.
full career.
Okay.
Bench
Mm,
player.
did your player play on a team that made the playoffs this year? And that's excluding like the two play-in teams that didn't get it. So just the finalized 1 through 8 seeds.
No.
Okay.
Hmm. Okay. Whole career. Are we doing like a limited amount of guesses on the players, or can I shoot a guess now?
You can shoot anytime. It just like counts as like your question for the round.
Okay. Uh,
If you already just nail it, that would be insane.
is it Jonas Valanciunas
No.
by any chance? Okay.
I got scared for a second. Okay.
What?
Uh, it's not a playoff team. Okay. I already know I asked about 4+ years. Kind of similar. Has your player ever made an all NBA team in their career?
All NBA team. Nope.
Okay. Interesting. And
Okay.
like not ever in his career, right? Not just
Not
this
ever
past.
in, not ever in their career.
Okay.
So then I'll ask you, has your player ever been an all-star, has ever had an all-star selection in their career?
No.
Mm.
We got some bums here.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
You're
Interesting.
really
So
scraping the
then,
bottom of the barrel for these guys.
mhm. Okay. Is your player a okay? Like their numerical position, is it like three or above? It's like three, four, five.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Mm. Okay, Western Conference forward or center, bench, averaging less than 20 a game. Didn't spend their whole career with this team. They've never been an all-star. What was the question you asked me about the playoffs? You asked me one question.
I just said like, did they make the playoffs this year?
Did the team that your player is on miss the playoffs this year?
Yes.
They did miss the playoffs. Okay. Miss
Okay.
the
So we,
yachts.
we got
Miss.
two guys that didn't do anything, didn't make the
Yeah.
playoffs. Okay. Might have to pull the standings up just to remember some of these teams. Okay.
Wait, and when you said when I said didn't make the playoffs, or that's counting the five teams that didn't make the play-in at all, and the two teams from the play-in that didn't make the playoffs at all, right? So out of those seven teams in total, it's from one of those.
Yeah, I just did it like on the same criteria as like my question. So
Okay.
none of the final 1 through 8 seeds.
Okay. Nice.
Okay. Uh, would you say your player is a better defensive threat than offensive threat?
Uh, n no, I wouldn't say that.
Okay, so not better on defense than
Yeah, not
offense.
not
Okay.
better on defense than offense. Okay. Um, would you say your player is would you say your player is a um good vet presence in the locker room, like good role model in the locker room?
Okay. Subjective one.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say no.
No, okay, not good.
So you said specifically like you asked if they're a good vet slash locker room
Yeah, if they're like
presence.
a good vet presence or a locker room presence to have.
Okay. Yeah, I'll say no to that. Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. It seems that did make. Okay, I just want to get. I need to like double down and see how good this guy is. So I said all NBA. Have they ever been an all-star in their career?
Nope.
Okay. Okay. There we go. At least I know it's really bad.
Yeah. Okay. Western Conference. That's not a good. you said not a good. So you said it was not like this player wouldn't you wouldn't recognize them as like a good vet presence or like a role model.
Correct. Yeah. What you said. Yeah.
Man, man. All right. Did your player average uh 10 rebounds or more per game this season?
No.
No. Wow, these guys can't score or rebound at all.
Is your player a center?
Nope.
Okay.
Is your player a small forward?
He is, yes.
Okay, small forward.
I guess same question. Is your player a power forward?
No.
So I got two small forwards here, I guess.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I would say like I mean he's played a little bit interchangeably, but you would think of him, and I feel like the majority of people would think of him as a small forward.
Okay. Good to know. Interesting.
Okay. All right, we got a small forward. All right, come on. There's gotta this guy's gotta be here. All right, I'm gonna take a guess.
Oh my.
Is it is it Doug McDermott from the Kings?
Is not Doug McDermott.
Doug McDermott. Okay.
Okay. Mm, okay. I'm gonna take a shot here, and I think he fits everything so far. Is your player Miles Bridges?
No.
Oh, man, that felt good. Okay.
All right.
Not Miles Bridges.
Okay. Is your player is your player the team that your player is on, or do they reside in the Pacific Division of the Western Conference?
He does.
He does. Okay.
Good question.
All right.
Okay. Kind of a similar, not really similar. Is your player, based on the final record at the end of the season, were they a 12 seed or worse? So 12 to 15 in the East, I guess.
Make sure they they were not a 12 seed.
Okay. Okay, okay.
Okay, so let me make sure I'm looking at the right teams here. Um, okay, so we got Pacific Division. We're looking at a team that missed the playoffs. So we got damn, a lot of these teams missed the playoffs in the Pacific. All right, so we got Clippers, Warriors, Kings. Okay, is your player? Okay, I'll go a little more specific. Is your player on the Sacramento Kings?
No.
No. Okay.
Oh man, looks like we're on the teams part here pretty much. Okay.
Yeah.
Is your player on the Milwaukee Bucks?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay, okay.
I think you're more than definitely getting in on this next one, so I might have
Oh
to
shoot.
take a shot
Really?
here to figure it out. Okay.
Small forward for the Bucks.
Is your player all right. Is your player Benedict Mathurin?
Wow, what a guess. It is
Oh,
Benedict
ho,
Mathurin.
ho.
Wow,
Oh
what a
man, that
snipe.
was. I mean, wait, who's gonna be your guess for the box one?
I'm a little confused because see, I want to say Kyle Kuzma,
There
but
you go.
oh, okay, there
It's
we go.
Kuzma.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, Kuzma.
I
Okay,
had
there
to
we
take a
go.
shot there because I knew you.
Yeah.
I was pretty convinced you'd get the Kuzma one, so I had to take my shot there and guess that. That's a good one actually. I feel like I've heard like I mean I feel like Matherin could be seen as like a not a great like presence there. He seems like sometimes he's a little bit of
Yeah.
a all about me guy. So that's a good one. I like
Picked
that.
him because he's a kind of younger too. And
Yeah,
then
that's a good one.
I try to throw you off because like he's technically not a starter, but he gets like
Yeah,
starter minutes. So
yeah.
you read through my
That's a
plan
good
there.
one. That was a good one. That was a good one. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we'll play that again sometime soon.
All right, so now we're going to preview the first Western Conference or the first conference finals game that we have. And this is going to be the Western Conference Finals, and we're going to have the San Antonio Spurs, led by Victor Wembanyama, taking on the number one seed, reigning champions OKC Thunder. This is a matchup that gained a lot of attention during the regular season, as it was really looked like throughout the whole season that the Spurs were going to be the only team that would be able to dethrone the Thunder, just like based on their play style and everything, and the matchups they had during the season. And looks like we all got the conference finals matchups that we wanted in the Western Conference Finals. This looks like it'll be a playoff series that we're going to remember for ages to come. It's like one of the most recent battles of 60 plus win teams coming in the playoffs. We haven't had, I feel like we haven't had a Western Conference Finals with this level of like anticipation around it. Like maybe even since like originally I was thinking maybe something like Rockets Warriors back in like 2018 and 19, but you got might have to go even further than back than that Thunder and Warriors back when KD was still on the Thunder. But just a matchup of absolute two titans this season. And let's dig into like their previous matchups during the regular season first. Just talk about how that might affect our picks for this season. So OKC, the Spurs actually went 4-1 against OKC during the regular season this year. They beat them in the NBA Cup game, which was their first matchup, and then they beat them in two games in a span of 3 days. They beat them on the 23rd of December, and then they beat them on Christmas Day matchup. The one game that OKC won, they had won right after that, and then they played one more time in February when the Thunder had rested a lot of their players, and the Spurs were able to blow them out then. But you can really take away the most important things from the three first games, and you can even add in the fourth one you want there. But that's still 3 wins for the Spurs over a total of 4 games. And one thing you want to look at in those games specifically is if you go back and check out like the box scores for those games, you're going to see that Victor Wembanyama is not listed as a starter in those games. And you're thinking, oh, like did he even play in this game or something like that? But he just came off the bench in those first 2 games. And the first game in the NBA Cup game was a close win, only a 2 point win by the Spurs. But then the Spurs were able to dominate them in that second game and win by 20 points there. So if you look at it and you say, okay, like this is what we saw in the regular season, like it looks like almost the Spurs have like a sort of blueprint, so to speak, for like how to deal with the Thunder because they have a lot of like good weapons on the defensive end. They can deploy against Shea and deploy against some of their other bigger wings like AJ Mitchell and Jalen Williams. But what are your thoughts, Tish, on how you think the Spurs handled these matchups during the regular season? And do you think that carries any weight going into this playoff matchup between them?
Oh yeah, I think like pretty much OKC's biggest weakness earlier in the season. They had two problems mainly. One being like a pretty poor 3-point shooting, which is kind of surprising for such a great team. And then the other being outside of like Shea, really lacking like a primary like ball handler that can also be effective on offense as well. Like we saw with J-Dub, he's obviously like a good scorer and everything, but he's always had problems being like an on-ball scorer. He kind of needs Shea with him to get him the ball for him to create like kind of be like a catch and shoot, create off of like Shea's gravity type of player. So I think the Spurs kind of exploited that with their like really deep guard depth that they've had pretty much all season long. Maybe a guy like Dylan Harper, he kind of like improved as the season went. But aside from him, I'd say all their guards have been pretty dominant throughout the year. No one's really gotten better as the year went on. They've just been pretty good throughout the entire time. So that's one thing that they did to deal with OKC's lack of like a ball handler is kind of like using OKC's like giving them a taste of their own medicine with that like defensive pressure on the ball handler when Shea isn't there. Like we kind of saw in those games that the Thunder lost, like Shea still got pretty much 30 points a game in almost all of those games. He was playing well, but the problem was when he wasn't on the court, they didn't have a good ball handler, and the Spurs took advantage of that. That's one thing. And then I think the other, kind of like I said, the 3-point shooting. We saw the Thunder made some acquisitions later. They got Jared McCain. Saw the rise of like AJ Mitchell to help with their 3-point shooting. But up until that point, Like they had a lot of good defensive perimeter guys, but no one that could really shoot effectively from beyond the arc. So definitely things have changed since those matchups, but I don't think enough has changed to kind of be like, oh, it was just the regular season. Let's ignore it. Even if you ignore the last matchup where the Thunder pretty much benched their entire starting five, the Spurs are 3-1 up against OKC going into the playoffs right now. And in those games, Wemby was on a minutes restriction in almost all of them except for one, I believe. So definitely like something not just ignore, even though the playoffs are different, experience matters more. Maybe the Spurs are a bit younger here, but I think right now, if you're the Spurs, like you're pretty much as motivated as you've ever been because you beat these guys 3 times, 4 times in the regular season, and like you think like you have what it takes to beat them. So I think that's pretty much a good summary of what they did in the regular season, and then now maybe look into what they did in the playoffs. So I'd say both of these teams have had the Spurs have definitely had a tougher road to get to the conference finals. I mean, both of their first round matchups, OKC and Spurs, are relatively simple. But then in the second round, we saw OKC sweep the Lakers, whereas the Spurs kind of had a closer than expected dogfight within a pretty injured Timberwolves team there, taking it to 6 games, ultimately winning in pretty dominant fashion, but still more games than a Spurs fan would want. What are your takeaways from how that series went for the Spurs? Anything like any holes that you see in the Spurs, or was it just like, you can't overlook the Wolves? That's how good of a team they are.
Yeah, and I think that falls a little bit more into the first thing you were saying, like there could be like some slight holes that you see in like the Spurs roster and like their game plan, what you saw in the series against the Wolves. Obviously, a great fight from the Wolves, especially being down so many of their key players and a lot of their key players that were on the court just playing through injuries and things like that, like Anthony Edwards and Ayo Dosunmu, guys playing through like different illnesses and like battling certain ailments and things like that. But the way that the Wolves were able to win some of their games against the Spurs and keep it the closer series than a lot of people had anticipated, like you said, was I think through their physicality and the way they were just able to rough up Wemby and rough up a lot of the guys that are like their younger players and just seeing these playoff minutes for the first time. And you see a guy like Steph Castle, who's a guy that like as much as we talked about in the last episode, he's starting to like embrace a little bit of the like trying to like flop and like get calls and things like that. He's still a strong physical player, and he was able to put force against force and match the amount of force that the Wolves were able to bring. And you saw a guy like Wemby at the beginning of the series, he was sort of getting pushed around a little bit by like Naz Reid, Julius Randle, Rudy Gobert, some of their like big guys there, even some of their guards like Anthony Edwards and Ayo Dosunmu. Anytime he would get matched up against them in the post, they would still see it. You would still see a good fight from their guards to be able to push him out of the post and things like that, and make sure he's able to get a deep seal there. But he was able to adjust it as the series went on. You saw sort of in Game 5 and Game 6, as the closeout games of the series, he was able to match their physicality, like I mentioned before, and like the whole team was able to match their physicality overall. So I do think it was you could see the growth itself from the Spurs during the series. You saw at the beginning how they weren't able to handle that physicality and how it sort of threw them off their game and things like that. But you could see as it got later in the series, they were able to get more comfortable with it and still get into their rhythm with their shot making and things like that, which led to them having some of their blowout wins towards the end of the series, which I think is important for going into this series because we talked about how the Wolves have been one of the most physical teams during the regular season when they decide to try in the regular season and during the playoffs overall. And you know that OKC has always been a team that's been really physical on the defensive end of the floor with the guys like Alex Caruso, Lou Dort, even guys like Jalen Williams, who is like as much as you think of a guy like him as more of their offensive threat, he's still able to get in a stance and defend and put that physical ball pressure on like some of the ball handlers for the Spurs. So I think that was a really good test for the Spurs to be able to face that in the last series, probably the most physical team or one of the most physical teams in the entire playoff field and going against another one of the most physical teams in the playoff field. I think they have a good test for that. But like you mentioned with on the OKC side of it, they really haven't faced any real competition in terms of what they're going to be seeing on the defensive end from the San Antonio Spurs. If you combine the collective talents of all the rim protectors on the Phoenix Suns and the Los Angeles Lakers, does it even match a half of the output of what Victor Wembanyama does? Like he just because he's so talented and because of the deficiency on those rosters happens to be like rim protection. You have guys like DeAndre Ayton and Jackson Hayes on the Lakers, and you have guys like Mark Williams, Isaac Iguodaro on the Suns, and it's just like those guys aren't able to just provide any type of resistance compared to what they're going to be seeing with Wemby in the paint. And even they're like perimeter defenders. You have a guy like Ryan Dunn who played like some of the minutes for the for the Suns. Dillon Brooks obviously a very talented perimeter defender, but he's just the only one they have on their roster. And the Lakers obviously we know they have Marcus Smart playing on the defensive end, but that's really their only good point of attack defender. But then you see it, you turn and you see a team like the Spurs that has a guy like Dylan Harper coming off the bench, a guy like Devin Vassell in their starting lineup, a guy like Julian Champagnie, who's a talented shooter of the basketball too, and he's able to get in a defensive stance and guard up against some of the better ball handlers on the OKC Thunder. And then lastly, it's like we mentioned, Stephon Castle and things like that. Even De'Aaron Fox, who you would say is like, at least he is willing to put in the effort and try on defense and make the whole defensive structure work around him and just being able to put in the effort to defend. So I would say that OKC, I really think there's a good chance the Spurs, if they do, you want to steal home court in every single series, obviously, especially as you're the underdog and you're the road team. There's a really good chance I think the Spurs can take game one of this series because I think OKC just being able, maybe coming off the sort of like rest versus rust type of thing, like they haven't been playing in a while. They've had two straight sweeps, like four easy games in every single series. So are they going to be able to take that and be able to ramp up the emotion or ramp up the physicality as quickly as they need to? And I think the Spurs coming off a really hard series could be able to do that. And I think they do have a really solid chance to steal game one, which is going to be really important if they want to win the series because that's going to help them steal home court advantage. But like you mentioned before, I think the Spurs overall just have been a lot better tested during the entire playoff so far. And I think that's something they have going in their favor leading into this Western Conference Finals matchup.
Yeah, kind of like you. And I mean, not to get too much into our actual predictions here, but like part of the reason why I've like inevitably had this series going to 7 games is just because of the fact that like I think the Spurs will steal one of game one and two, just because OKC coming off of like 8 straight wins against pretty undermatched teams. Maybe the Lakers, they had some close games in there, but ultimately, sweep is a sweep. So we could see some complacency on OKC's part. Kind of like being not overconfident, but just like not being getting the reps in. Whereas like the Spurs, they played a pretty physical team. They're kind of used to it, so maybe they could steal game one or two and extend the series kind of further. But yeah, I think definitely like OKC not being that battle tested, if you want to say, in this current season is definitely kind of gonna kind of harm them and would give the Spurs the upper edge here because even though I think we're gonna ignore both the round one matches, but the round two, even though it was a 6 game series and it was relatively comfortable for the Spurs for most of the games, still like really tough physical basketball. Like we saw that one clip of like Julius Randle like shoving Wemby to the ground. I mean, it was a bit of a flop, but at the same time, like that's just the type of stuff you're gonna get when you play against OKC on every single play. You got obviously their like the two like bigs they have, Hardenstein and Chet, probably the most physical and arguably best like big man tandem in the entire NBA right now because Hardenstein is one of the most physical bigs. He gets a lot of rebounds. He has his patented like left-handed hook shot from like 11 feet out. Can't really do much else, but he's gonna get you boards. And then like Chet Holmgren is almost the exact polar opposite of a big, which makes that duo work so well because Chet, I mean, obviously, he's one of the best defenders in the league. You could argue he's probably the second best defender outside, second best defending big man after Wemby, of course. But he's unique because he can stretch the floor. He's been shooting arguably probably the best player for OKC in the last series. He shot very well from beyond the arc. So maybe I think that's one new thing that the Spurs are gonna have to deal with is the fact that out of all the bigs they've faced in this playoffs, they haven't really had to deal with like a kind of like a stretch big where Chet could potentially draw Wemby out of the paint, and then as a result, OKC could increase their rim pressure. And they're already one of the highest, like I think they have a very high like rim rate, one of the highest teams that goes to the rim a lot. And so especially with Chet being like that kind of like unicorn build where he can shoot the three and go into the paint if needed, if he can even draw Wemby out, like forget about Chet's points per game, just his presence, if he draws Wemby out of the paint, that could definitely be something for OKC to capitalize on and attack the rim even more. So I think that's one new thing that the Spurs are gonna have to deal with is like, I mean, they went against Rudy Gobert, who's like the exact opposite of Chet, where he's like him stretching the floor is like outside the paint, and if he even does that. So I think that's gonna be new, and that's why I kind of like really am looking forward to this series. Kind of like you said, probably the best Western Conference matchup since like I would agree, like the Thunder Warriors, exactly 10 years ago actually now. Wow. But it's like, you got two of these probably the two favorites going forward for the next like 3+ years for who's going to be the champions. And they just both match up so well against each other. Like I don't think there are a lot of major matchups that either team can really capitalize on. Obviously, teams are going to have their advantages, but both teams have insane depth, probably the two deepest teams left in the playoffs, even going into the playoffs. They have some of the best bigs in the game. They have some of the best guards in the game, very well coached, very good home court advantage, good defensively. So I think we're definitely going to get one for the ages here, and I got to go into 7.
Yeah, and I think, like you mentioned about the teams just being so evenly well matched and things like that in terms of both their matchups in terms of the game plan and like how their coaches want to execute things and how they like how the specific starting fives are going to match up with each other. You could probably say in terms of both starting fives you're going to see on the court for both respective teams, you would say really the only like weakest defensive point on either team is probably going to be a guy like De'Aaron Fox on the Spurs, and that's partly due to just his build and things like that. Obviously, because he's such a talented offensive player, because of his like slight frame and things like that. That's also why he's able to be so fast and get to the get downhill and attack the rim and things like that. And it's hard for rim protectors on the other end to stop him. But that's part of what makes him a difficult defender to like game plan around as one of your lead guards on defense. But I would say as much as that's like one of the things that's hard for the Spurs to do, they have the better rim protector in this series. And I would say as well of a defender as Chet Holmgren is, he's not Victor Wembanyama and no one is. So you could really say they don't have that strong defensive point guard that like you could say like this OKC has a little bit of a better defensive point guard in SGA as well as talented as he is on offense, he's still able to defend really well. You could say the Spurs are able to make up for that because of how talented Wemby is. So like as much as you might have a couple of drives to the rim where like De'Aaron Fox is allowing something to go by that like sometimes if you had a league average like defensive point guard it wouldn't be letting to go by. You have a much more talented defensive big man protecting the paint and patrolling the paint for you. So he's going to be able to clean up a lot of the mistakes from just your overall starting five. Even if other guys are making mistakes like Steph Castle or Devin Vassell, some of those guys happen to make mistakes or something like that, which you don't really see too often, but they're going to be challenged a lot by different ball handlers by OKC in this series. So if there's something like that where they happen to make mistakes there, you have a guy in your back pocket that's always going to be able to help you take care of that. So like you said, I think it just matches up really well overall for this series. And before we give our picks, why don't we do? I want to ask you who you think some of the X factors are going to be in this series. So let's go for each team. Let's start with OKC. I'll give you who my X factor is going to be. And I think it's someone you mentioned before. You might actually have the same guy as me. I'm going to go with Chet Holmgren. And I think it's really just due to, like you mentioned, his not necessarily how many points he's going to be scoring. It's not necessarily about how much he's putting the ball in the bucket. It's more about how can he move Victor Wembanyama away from the bucket? How can he get him away from the paint, draw him out towards the three-point line, and make him respect the shot? Because we know Chet is a talented shooter. He can make that shot, but he has to be making the shot consistently during the series for Wemby to be able to be out there and be outside of the paint so he can't be patrolling that area like he usually is. So I'm going to say Chet Holmgren is my X factor for the OKC Thunder. Who do you think is an X factor for you on the Thunder side of things?
Yeah, Chet's definitely like one of the X factors for sure. Pretty much for everything you said there. Just like, can he draw Wemby out of the paint? Even if he doesn't get any points up, just his presence could really get OKC over the edge there. And then someone else for me would just be J-Dub. He hasn't played in. He missed the entire last series actually, and he's had that hamstring injury that he's been dealing with. So he like put out like a vlog on his like YouTube channel. He said he's like healthily good to go, and he actually could have. He said he could have returned in this series, but because like OKC was doing so well, like why rush a recovery if needed? Just take some games off. So I think this series could also really just come down to how well J-Dub plays. If he's like we saw last year, he put up like an All NBA, All Star, All Defensive season. Pretty rare for like not that commonly seen, I'd say, in the last like 10, 15 years, except for like the superstars of the league. So can he return to that level? I think that could get OKC over the edge. If not, they might lose. So I'd say J-Dub and Chet are definitely the X factors for OKC. And then kind of just going to the Spurs side of things. I mean, like to me, it's got to be Luke Cornett, just because we've seen one thing with Wemby. He's kind of had a bit of a. I mean, it's the playoffs. He's probably going to play 40 minutes a night, barring any injuries or anything like that. But one thing that he's had a bit of a problem with throughout his career is kind of like, can he handle that high workload just because of his build and everything? Like, such a physically taxing game for him. He spends like 2 hours before every single night, like stretching just to play like in that game of basketball. So, can like the Spurs balance, of course, pushing Wemby, him being their star, but then also when he's resting, can Luke Cornett step up and still provide at least some rim protection without Wemby being there? Because we've seen in like example in like the Wolves games, for example, when Luke Cornett was on the court compared to Wemby, we saw like that's when a lot of the runs would happen for the Wolves. So can Luke Cornett step up and be like an above average rim protector? That could really help the Spurs. What about you?
Yeah, and I'm gonna go with a really underrated guy in Victor Wembanyama. No, I'm just kidding. I'm gonna take my X factor for the Spurs in this series. I'm gonna take Julian Champagnie, and he's the guy that's been there, really been penciled in as that fourth starter. That fifth starter spot started a lot with like Harrison Barnes going instead of that Devin Vassell role. Then sort of shifted to Devin Vassell towards the end of the season once the playoffs have started. But Champagnie's been solidly in that starting lineup almost the entirety of the season, and especially in this playoffs, right? Obviously, for almost all these guys on the Spurs, It's their first playoff run, getting these first real playoff minutes. But he's playing about 30 minutes a game. He's not averaging any crazy numbers or anything like that, especially for a starter. He's only averaging about 11 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, about 1.5 assists per game, and then a steal or a block in each of the games, roughly. But his shooting percentages is what I really want to focus on. He's shooting 49.4% from the field, so that's about 50% from the field, and not just 40, 45%, 45.2% from three. And his his free throw percentage is pretty good too, 85.7%. So he could be a guy that in the clutch, if he's fouled, like you're going to be confident that he's going to be making his free throws. So it's a guy like that I want to focus on. And because you know that a lot of attention when the Spurs are on offense is going to be focused on when De'Aaron Fox has the ball, specifically when De'Aaron Fox has the ball and he's rolling with Victor Wembanyama, or they're running some type of pick and roll action on the strong side of the ball, they have it there. If Champagnie is going to be positioned on the weak side of the ball, you have a guy in De'Aaron Fox that's as talented as he is as a playmaker, as a shooter. He's a really good playmaker too. So he's going to be able to make that pass. You know, Victor Wembanyama is also talented, and he can make the pass too. So Champagnie just being able to be ready in the corner, can he hit his spot up threes when Fox is making a roll to the paint, when Wemby's making a roll to the paint, and either of them has the ball, can he be confident and knock down the shots that they give him on the outside corners and things like that when he's sitting his shots from the wings? And same thing on defense. He's going to be tasked with guarding guys on defense that can all handle the ball. He might be getting the J-Dub matchup depending on his health in the series. He's obviously going to be switched on to Shea at certain points. He's not going to be able to avoid that matchup. So can he hold his ground there and make sure that he's not able to be targeted as a weak point on defense? So I'm going to say Champagnie is my X factor for the Spurs. So now that we've gotten all the analysis out of the way, it's time to make our picks for the series. We haven't told each other what picks we're taking in the series. We obviously picked on the opposite side of this when we did our pre-playoffs picks, but I'm interested in in hearing what you think the pick is now. So why don't you tell us first who you're taking in this Western Conference matchup?
Yeah, so I mean, this is definitely a lot of back and forth. Both teams very talented, can easily win this series no matter what our picks are here. But ultimately, I just went with OKC in seven. Really tough choice. I wanted Spurs. I mean, I want the Spurs to win, don't get me wrong, but ultimately I just went with OKC. I guess should we say our picks first and then talk about it, or should I just go now? What do you
Yeah,
think?
I mean, I can give my pick and then like we can talk about it a little bit after.
Yeah.
I'm on the other side on this one.
Okay.
I'm rolling with the young boys. I'm rolling with the guys with the no playoff experience yet they're getting it done. So I'm taking the San Antonio Spurs. Just like you, I'm taking it in 7 games. So I could see this coming down to like both teams win all their home games and it comes down to a game seven in OKC. But I have confidence in a guy that we think could be like a future generational. I mean, he is a generational talent, like future, like all-time great. So I think they could get it done in Game Seven. So I'm gonna take the Spurs in 7 games. What do you think? Like, just give some of your thoughts, like what you think is gonna happen in this series. How could you see it playing out and things like that, and what
Yeah.
led you to the OKC pick?
So I mean, like we talked a lot about the specifics, so I'll just say like maybe a few of my points here. One, kind of like expanding on that rim thing that I was talking about earlier with check and draw Wemby out of the paint and like OKC capitalized. We saw like this be a problem in the Spurs series where Nas Reed, he's like the 1-6 man of the year. So he's definitely a above average center in the league. But obviously, Chet's like levels above him. We saw Nas Reed had like 3+3 pointers in 4 out of 6 of the games, and then in one of those other games he had two. So if Chet can match that shooting efficiency, it'll force Wemby to be drawn out. And we kind of saw in the Wolves games when Nas Reed would be on the floor and like hot, that's when those runs would start to happen because you'd force Wemby to come out, let the other guys attack like Ant and all that. So I think as long as Chet is on point, locked in, plays like he did in that Lakers series where he was the best player on the court, I think he can force Wemby to kind of respect the shooting, get a hand up, go out, and open up the rim for guys like SGA, J-Dub, even like a guy like AJ Mitchell, who's speaking of next. I kind of talked about next that OKC's downfall throughout the year. I mean, if we can even call it a downfall, they were still the 1 seed, but they really lacked like another rotational ball handler. And I think they kind of found that in two guys, not only one. One with AJ Mitchell, we saw his ascension in the last series where he averaged 22 points a game, and then two with Jared McCain that like trade at the trade deadline where like Sam Presti absolutely fleeced like Daryl Morey and the Sixers. We saw them land Jared McCain who fixed their ball handling problem and as well as like their 3 point shooting. He just had the highest 3 point shooting percentage for an OKC player in their franchise history in the playoffs. And then I saw this like insane stat where he's averaging 0.76 points per minute in the playoffs, which is third highest all time for a guard after Michael Jordan and Luka Doncic. Obviously, sample size extrapolated a bit there, but just a cool number to hear. So I think these two guys can really be a big solution to OKC kind of matching the Spurs' guard depth. Now they have two of their guys on their own, and then Jada. I mean, if he's as long as he's been good to go apparently. So we technically should see him just return to the starting lineup, put in 30 plus minutes a game, barring no hidden injuries. But a healthy J-Dub can really pose a problem, I think, for a lot of the Spurs perimeter guys like De'Aaron Fox, Steph Castle, some of those guys. And lastly, I think just going kind of like off the getting away from like the objective stuff, just going off of the vibes. I think the Spurs are they're both very young teams, so it's hard to be like the Spurs are too young to win this series when you have like a guy who's going to end up like top 10 all time, top 5 all time, barring no injuries, nothing like that. But I just think that OKC, they kind of been here before. They know how to get it done. They're very motivated. They've like, I mean, including me, when we're trying to troll our friend, like when we're trying to troll Aki, we say they have like an asterisk ring. But the thing is, like a lot of people truly do believe that, whether they've won the series or not, if Tyrese Halliburton was healthy for game 7. So I think OKC is like pretty motivated more than ever to go out and get a ring to prove to the world that, hey, like we're the next dynasty. We're the 2010s Warriors of this decade. And the Spurs, you got to wait another year. But all that being said, I like if the Spurs win this series, I'm not going to be shocked. I'm just going to roll with OKC here.
No, that makes sense. I mean, we talked about it. This is going to be one of the most tightly contested series that we've seen in a long time in the playoffs. More than likely, this is going to go. I'm sure it's going to go 6 games, but I think almost everyone is hoping and anticipating this is going to go 7 games, and we get the full 7 game series, knockout, drag out fight between these two teams. Um, but just so sticking on like the offensive side of the ball, so I think when the Thunder are coming down on offense and they're going to be deciding, okay, how do we want to attack this team? How do we want to attack this team that's really loaded in terms of their rim protection with Wemby, and they do have all these really talented perimeter defenders that we haven't really seen in a series before. We haven't seen these types of defenders in the two matchups we've had previously in the playoffs. I think their strat that they'd probably be typically going to if they were matching up with almost any other team would be trying to run their pick and rolls using their two bigs and getting the rim protector out of the paint and getting it switched onto SGA or getting it switched onto J Dub or AJ Mitchell, one of their ball handling guards, and letting them make the roll, letting them just like run the course of action from there. Decide like, do you want to take the big on and just like go for the basket or something like that? Do you want to like insert or start an action or something like that and get someone open in the corner or whatever for a shot or something like that? But I think one of the issues with that is you can drag Wemby out of the paint and run these switches if you want, but partly due to just because of his size and nature and just his wingspan and things like that, he can sort of hedge like he's going out to like defend the ball handler or something like that, but still he's able to guard the paint, put a hand back and make sure the pass isn't there, the pocket pass, or even like a lob threat or something like that. And you have really talented guys on the back, a lot of talented athletes specifically. If you have a guy like Steph Castle that's like guarding a guy on the wing or in the corner, he's a guy that's really talented and really athletic. He's able to come all the way from the corner. He's going to be able to disrupt some of your lob passes and things like that. He's going to make sure you're not going to have easy lob finishes to Hardenstein or Holmgren or things like that. So I think that's part of the problem, being able to draw Wemby out. You're not fully drawing him out ever, unless you're going to draw him all the way out to the half court line or something like that. And that's going to take up some time, and you're not going to be able to run your action to the full way you want to. Second thing is, if you do switch him out, he's not like some typical slow-footed 7-foot rim protector that he's like easy to get around and it's an easy bucket every time you do that. He's a really talented perimeter defender too. That's what makes him the defensive player of the year, and that's why he's going to win multiple defensive player of the years for the rest of his career, assuming he stays healthy. So it's a really hard matchup for OKC to get around, and getting around how to get around the Wemby problem. Obviously, that's a thing that like a lot of teams are going to be dealing with the next couple of years. So I think they have a way to do that. And I also want to talk about how when the Spurs, when they have the ball on the offensive end, specifically the way I think they're going to be having to use Dylan Harper in a larger role than they've had before, because I think when Dylan Harper is going to be on the floor, running a lot of the bench groups and things like that, being the lead guard on those bench groups, and just making sure they can have the minutes when you have some of your bench guys coming in, especially like when Wemby's off the floor and specifically when you have Cornette out there. I think it's going to be a really important series for him, because when you have some of your best perimeter defenders from OKC off the floor, if you have a guy like Lou Dort that's not on the floor, or if you have a guy like Alex Caruso that's not on the floor, things like that, you want to see, can you get some good solid foundational points for the series from Dylan Harper? Can you get some good drives to the basket? Can you get some good paint attacking points? Can you get to the free throw line too? Can you get some potential and ones and things like that? Can you get to the line? Can you get to the basket and then kick it out to shooters and things like that? So I think Dylan Harper, he's going to have a big series just because of who he's going to be facing when he's on the court. He's going to be facing a lot of OKC's lesser defenders because they're coming off the bench and things like that. So I think, I'm not saying that they're bad defenders, but they're best defenders obviously in their starting lineup. So I think when you're attacking guys like Jared McCain, who's a talented defender, but he's not as good as some of the other defenders on their floor. Isaiah Joe, he's a great shooter, but not exactly the best defender out there. So just making sure, can you get some of those points by doing that, attacking downhill and going to the rim, and see if you can spread out the defense and all like that. So, like we mentioned before, it's going to be a really tightly contested series. Obviously, we could both see it going either way because we both have the respective teams in 7 games. So, obviously, that 7 game could come down to whatever. Any last thoughts on this series? I mean, I think we've gone at it from almost every angle possible, but there's so much to talk about with just how talented these teams are. Any last thing that you want to like mention or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like you texted me earlier. Like this is like the NFC Championship this year, where it's like the de facto finals, where I think we can both pretty comfortably say whoever wins this series is probably going to end up as the NBA champion. So pretty much getting like an early NBA finals in a way. So going to be some exciting basketball for us to watch here.
Yeah.
So now we're going to do our Eastern Conference Finals predictions. We got the Cleveland Cavaliers. They beat the Pistons in Game 7 in pretty dominant fashion, taking on the New York Knicks. And I mean, just the Cavs, they had a good performance. We saw Donovan Mitchell play well, finally getting his first conference finals nod. I mean, finally he's about to turn 30. He was kind of due for one, so there we go. And then we saw their bigs have a pretty good game. Evan Mobley, Jared Allen played pretty dominant, looking like Shaq and Hakeem Olajuwon out there, if one might say. But for this prediction, it's kind of interesting because it's almost like polar opposite of the Western Conference, where it's like we're trying to pick who's going to lose in the finals, essentially. So who's extending their postseason just not to win, I guess. But I'm going to take the the New York Knicks in 6 games here. Ultimately, as much as I want one of my favorite players, Donovan Mitchell, to make his first ever finals berth, I just don't think he's going to be able to do it with the team that he has around him. Not that they're a bad team, but just they're facing a pretty juggernaut of a team in the Knicks. For a couple of reasons here, I think one, the Pistons, where they succeeded was like obviously their perimeter and in general, just their entire defense, and they have a lot of good perimeter guys, especially led by probably future deploy Asar Thompson. But the problem is none of these guys are capable of anything on the offensive side of the court, so they could stop Cleveland all they wanted. We saw Mitchell; he had a pretty good series overall, had multiple 30-point games, had the most playoff points in half of all time, played pretty well individually, but he still had some rough efficiency nights. James Harden didn't play too well. So we saw the Cavs kind of having problems with these perimeter defenders, but getting off easy because none of them could do anything on offense. So I think on the other hand, the Knicks have a lot of good 3-and-D guys where they're going to provide that same perimeter defense from guys like OG Anunoby, assuming he's good to go with that hamstring injury, something to look for the Knicks fans. And then other guys like Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart, who are pretty above average, I would say, like offense and defense, two-way guys in the league, much better than the Pistons in terms of being two-way. Um, and then the other thing is the Cavs overall, I just feel like as a team, they really lack a lot of consistency. Like a big reason why they won Game 7 so dominantly was both of their bigs were going at the same time. We saw Jared Allen and Evan Mobley both go like 20 plus, have a lot of boards, blocks, play pretty dominantly. And in a way, kind of look like the Eastern Conference version of like OKC's bigs, Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren, where one's kind of like a stretch big, the other one just like doing like all the dirty work. So at the same time, they just never are both on at the same time. And so I think as much as a dominant performance that they had in Game 7, I don't think it'll really translate to a full series against the Knicks. The only reason I could see it maybe going all the way to 6 games would just be like I feel like the Cavs could take one of the early games in New York just because New York's coming off a sweep. They might be a little rusty. They've kind of like been chilling back on their couch for a bit. And then also just like I think with Cleveland's bigs being so physical, we could see some of like Cat, Mitchell Robinson getting into foul trouble, and that could cause some struggles for the Knicks. But ultimately, I'm going to take the Knicks in 6 pretty comfortably here.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the same as you. I'm gonna take the Knicks in 6 games too. And this is not meant. I mean, 6 games, like most people would say, that's usually a competitive series. So it's obviously not meant as a disrespect to the Cavaliers. And they put together a great playoff performance so far this run. A team that like a lot of people just based on like how they were going in the regular season. Obviously not up to the standard they were in the regular season of last year, getting the number 1 seed and all that. But I mean, they were able to move further than they were last year. Obviously, that like stunning upset by the Pacers in the second round last year. So they're able to move past the second round and take down the 1 seed. So almost a reversal of roles as the 4 seed this time, taking on the 1 seed. But like you said, I think they're matching up with a team in the Knicks that has a lot of talent on the perimeter on defense specifically. Obviously, we know the rim protection is going to be a little bit down with Cat. Obviously, when Mitchell Robinson is a little bit better, but we know Cat as their starter at the 5 is going to be an easier point for them to attack the rim. But like you mentioned, their core starting wings of Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, and OG Anunoby, assuming he's healthy, like you said. That's a really talented starting trio of like wings you have there. That's really talented on the defensive end, and they all still bring it on the offensive end. We talked about how Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges specifically towards the end of the last couple of Knicks games in the playoffs, they've both been playing really well on the offensive end. And you know that Josh Hart, even though he's not as consistent of a shooter on the offensive end, he can still hit some big time shots every now and then. We've seen in clutch regular season games and clutch playoff games for him. He's come through in some of the big moments. And I think like we're just gonna have to see if the Cavs are to win this series at all somehow. We're gonna have to see a really dominant performance from Donovan Mitchell, which we have seen before. We've seen this in the playoffs. You talked about that game, I believe it was game 4 or game 5, where he had that dominant second half performance and he drops almost 40 points in that second half. And I mean, like you could definitely see that in a game or two from him. But can you expect to see that for 4 games to get the win? Because I don't think you're going to get any type of that performance from either of the bigs. And I'm certainly not expecting that from a guy in James Harden, who's known to shrink in these biggest moments, especially as you get bigger to the conference finals and NBA finals moments, and especially you get later in the series. So, like you said, many of the similar things we're all repeat. We're both repeating the same points here. But I'm going to be taking the Knicks in 6 games to advance to their first NBA finals since 1999.
Yeah, I mean, even kind of similar to you. Like, even though I have the Knicks in 6, I would say like people would think like 6 games, pretty close series, but to me, I'm just kind of like taking the ceiling of the Cavs here for it going to 6 games. Like, I could easily see the Knicks winning and maybe even 5 games, but yeah, this would be
Yeah, and I
interesting seeing
wanted
the
to
Knicks back in the finals.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you one question before we wrap up this episode. But just talking about, so we know that now that the Cavs, since they're going to be making conference finals, obviously Mitchell's first conference finals and the Cavs' first conference finals since LeBron left them. So it's been like almost a little under 10 years at this point since LeBron left. But do you think, so with them making the conference finals this year, and then I guess we'll see how the series with the Knicks goes. Maybe it's really uncompetitive. You want to revisit your answer to this. But do you think this is the type of thing where the Cavs say, okay, we're confident, and the Cavs front office specifically says we're confident with what went down this season in the playoffs, and we don't want to make any moves? Or do you still think they're going to be looking at maybe shipping out one of the bigs or something like that, or just changing out one of the guards alongside Mitchell? But do you think they're going to make any other moves, or you think they're going to be competent with like and happy with what they have so far?
I think it's kind of going to be like a healthy medium of both ends where the Cavs definitely might have something to build on right now as things stand, but at the same time, maybe recognize that it was a bit of a rocky road to get here in the first place, where you went 7 games with a team that was extremely young in the Raptors, and then it's a respectable 7 game win over the 1 seed, the Pistons. So I think there's something to build on here. Maybe if they can find, I think what they really lack is a good wing. Like Max Strus, as good as he is from beyond the arc, he cannot be your starting 3 and like on a playoff contending team. So maybe get some kind of, as we talked about, good 3-and-D guys that are good on both sides of the court. Obviously figure out the guard situation, because I think James Harden was really like a kind of like a 1 year, maybe 2 year rental type of move, just like a win now move. But for the long term, he's not going to be there. So I think they need to find another guy that can maybe take some of the workload off of Mitchell in the backcourt, whether it's like a facilitator or a scorer. That's to be determined. Personally, just for the sake of Mitchell, I'd rather be kind of like a more facilitating guy that can just like contain the ball. Mitchell can maybe play little bit off the ball, get his looks, catch and shoot sometimes instead of just always creating all the time. But I think the bigs, they probably also could use another backup big, because like the problem with these two is they have pretty much no one that can back them up. So that's a big cause for a lot of their inconsistency, where we never see both Mobley and Allen on at the same time. It's always one or the other. So pretty much just like if they want to really become a contending team, when next year they're going to be a lot more healthy teams in the East, they probably want to add some more depth overall, specifically like get another center, get a good 3-and-D wing, and then just another ball handler to replace the potential departure of James Harden.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think, like you mentioned, it has to be a healthy medium, understanding they have a good team that's got them in the conference finals, but you don't want to be content with that and make sure you're still making improvements along the margins to make sure, like you said, they can be a real true contender in the East starting next year. But I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode. So that's our conference finals previews and our picks for both the series. Looks like we're going to have two really great series, and we're looking forward to watching both of those.
And in the next episode, we should be around like game two or game three in these series. So we'll give you some updates on there and some more thoughts on what's going on in the playoffs so far. But thanks for listening.